Welcome to Sunflower Movement. I am your host, Ashley Buckner. Before we get started, here's a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. I am a licensed therapist, but unless you have a signed consent form with me, I am not your therapist. This platform is not a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Sunflowers bloom in the most unexpected places, and they adjust to remain connected to the sun. Metaphorically, I define these sunflower movements as experiences with people, places, and moments where we feel seen, heard, and believed. This is Sunflower Movement, a community where people are able to show up authentically. Additionally, this podcast is an opportunity to ask, tell, and share anything with me, a licensed therapist and trauma specialist. Together, I, along with my guests, will explore a variety of personal stories about mental health, trauma, religious trauma, relationships, nervous system regulation, spirituality, and all that the healing process encompasses. The link to submit and ask, tell, share anything with me anonymously will be included in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in. I'm so excited for today's podcast and to have my very good friend, Rashell. So if you listen to the first episode, you heard about my sunflower tattoo, and Rashell is my sunflower, and we got these matching tattoos, and I don't think either one of us knew what this was going to evolve to, but here it is. So I'm really excited. Rashell is also a fellow therapist. I've known her pretty much almost my whole life, and we're going to talk about lots of things. So Rashell, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I have been a therapist for I was like 17 years. So I feel like
Oof.
my career, yeah, a long time. Um, my career's just totally evolved and gotten better, I think, just over time, and it's been really cool. And yeah, like Ash, you said, I've known you're probably your whole life. I'm a little bit older than you, so
Yeah. I remember when I very first finished graduate school, I remember you reaching out to me,
yes.
and we just kind of talked for a minute, and it was cool to feel seen because I was in San Diego at the time. It was way before I ever came back to Cedar, but you had been a therapist for a while.
Yeah, I actually thought about that as we were preparing for this podcast, because I thought that was long enough ago that I even still feel like I was new enough in my career that it's one of those things that you feel like you know so much, but you really don't know what you don't know. And so I think about how much I've even evolved, I think, since those conversations when you first left grad school. So yeah.
I know, and I mean, I even think about since when I very first came back to Cedar City and came to your house before I started working at the ranch. So we'll get into that. But yes, Rashell and I have known each other for a very, very long time. Our families were friends growing up, and we're both from Cedar City, Utah, born and
Yes.
raised. Rashell has a lot of heritage here in Cedar City, Utah, which is fun. Um, and she actually used to babysit me
Yeah.
for my family.
Yeah. Yeah, I love when you send me the pictures of when we were younger. And I just am always like, wow, that's like a trip, right? Yeah, I used to babysit you and your siblings, and we've been on a couple, I think our family went on like a Disneyland trip together once. And I think I went on like a family vacation one time with you guys. So yeah, no,
Yeah. It's kind
other.
of special too because it's like obviously no idea then where we would be now. But here we are, and I think our friendship is it's I think we had that history, but that wasn't the foundation of our friendship, and I think that's what's so cool is what it has blossomed into. Um so I'm when I moved back to Cedar, I reached out to you and I
Mhm.
said, "Hey, I'm coming back. I'm thinking about coming back to Cedar. I'm interested in working at Discovery Ranch, which is where you work currently. And it's a residential treatment facility for adolescent girls."
Yes.
And you kind of got me set up, and I came out and interviewed.
Yeah.
And then I went over to your house that night and we like talked, and I remember your girls, they were so young, and just feeling like, okay, yeah, I can do this. I can move back to Cedar City. And then I got the job at Discovery Ranch, and our offices were right across from each
Yes.
other. And I think that is when everything really began for us.
And our dogs were like best friends, right?
Oh yeah, our dogs were best friends because we could bring I mean you could bring dogs to the ranch. I don't work at the ranch anymore. I only worked there for a year, but I have such a to me the ranch is also really foundational in sunflower movement because it was the foundation of our friendship and relationship, but because of your experiences at the ranch, that's how I ended up becoming trained in brain spotting
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
because you got trained first.
I did. I got trained first. Yeah, I remember going into my training and coming back and being like, Ashley, this is crazy. You've got to do it. Like it's so amazing. Right. Um, and something about brain spotting, I think for me, just doing the training, I was like, okay, yeah, now it's time to go back to therapy, right? But then also opened up, I think, just more of this ability for me, I think, to be a better therapist, um, to be just almost like a better person, right? I feel like all around I've always gone to therapy, right? If you're a therapist, you should always be in therapy. It's important so you know your blind spots, so you know your just anything you need, like just your integrity. I just think there's so much about it, right? And being aware of what kind of activates you and what just how to be a better therapist. You'd always be in therapy here and there if you feel like, especially when things I think are hard. But um so I went back to therapy after I did the brain spotting training, and then I was a client, right, of a brain spotting therapist for a little while, and it made me a better person. I think made me a better parent, better wife, um, probably a better friend, better therapist all around. So truly believe in the power of brain spotting.
Yeah. I mean,
But
and
you're
I
you
remember that.
keep going. Yeah, you've kept going, but yeah.
And it's because I actually remember vividly that conversation. And it was after I had my second baby and there was a lot going on for me and I was like kind of in the throes of postpartum, and I remember you're like, this was crazy. You have to do it. You have to do brain spotting. And I was actually looking for my own therapist at the time, and I found someone who was trained in it, but I didn't start brain spotting with that therapist for about 6 months.
Mhm.
Just because I'm not working with that therapist anymore, but she wasn't super comfortable with it yet. But I was like, I want a brain body approach.
Yes.
One of my best friends said this is the thing that I need to be doing, and
Yeah.
it's transformative. And so that conversation started my brain spotting journey. I wouldn't have ever gone in this direction and be sitting where I'm at right now without that conversation. And I think that's so special, because then 6 months later, I started doing some brain spotting sessions, and you then reached out and said, hey, they're doing a brain spotting training at the ranch. Do you want to pay to come do it? And I was like, okay, yeah, yeah, I'll do it. And you want to know, I don't know if I've ever told you this. I almost chickened out the
Oh,
week
really?
of
Oh, you never
training.
told me that.
Yeah.
No.
So one of my things is I get really, like I'll get really anxious and insecure before trying something new, that I'll talk myself out of doing it. And that whole week, my like the kids had the flu, Dallas had the flu, and I was like, I'm gonna get the flu. I'm not gonna be able to do brain spotting training. Well, I never got it. And it was literally up until the day before that I was gonna pull out. And I'm so like something knew I needed to do brain spotting training at the ranch because it changed everything for me. So for those of you listening, we can all thank Rashell for starting this whole movement
Yeah.
because she inspired a lot. So, um yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit like about you, like what led you to become a therapist? For the listeners, Rashell was also raised Mormon, is no longer a member of the church. So I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about your journey, and and then I think we can get into like our friendship and like the conversations that eventually led to the tattoo and all of
Oh,
that as
we
we
should.
share.
We should. Yeah, so I mean, in all reality, I'm a sixth generation uh livestock rancher here in Cedar City. So my family were some of the first people, right, to settle in southern Utah. And of course, there's a lot of pride in that. There's a lot of just, yeah, just kind of cool. We have a livestock operation that we still do today, that my own kids are a big part of, that I truly believe in, just the value of hard work um, and just, yeah, working, being, we'll get into the horse stuff too. I mean, I guess I should have said that earlier, but I just started an equine therapy practice as well, but we can talk about that. But, so yeah, so my family actually came here, 1880s from Scotland. They were converted to the LDS faith and came over. They didn't come over on hand carts, but some of my family members did, but not the one I think I relate to the most. But came over, came out. Brigham Young sent them to southern Utah because they were cattle ranchers in Scotland. That's what they did, was livestock. And so sent them, to southern Utah to help settle here. And so there was always kind of this, and I guess so, yeah, growing up LDS, it was interesting. Well, and I'll say too, like, actually, like, your grandparents actually live down the street, right? You're like, so this is how connected we are, small town. We had this cool neighborhood where the majority of us that lived on these streets were LDS. So, growing up that way, just kind of dealt with, I think, some of that. The thing is it wasn't always stereotypical. I think for me, my parents were not married in the temple. My grandparents, um, were fairly religious. My grandfather held some callings, my grandmother did. I mean, just that kind of thing. So we grew up, and I think the one thing I noticed, and as I've reflected and I've done some of my own work on this, is that I kind of always felt like the outsider. My parents weren't married in the temple. We went to church, as a kid, you went to church here and there, and then of course as you got closer to being 8 and getting baptized, you started going a little bit more. Um, and I remember too, as a kid, on the weekends a lot, we'd spend a lot of time at our cabin because, of course, we had to check fence lines and check on our cows and do all this stuff. And I remember this, I would say stuff to my dad, like, well, don't you think we should be at church, right? Because there was always this thing. And my dad would say stuff to us like, well, this is the closest thing to God. We're up here on the mountain. What are you talking about? And as a kid, I remember, because I always felt like I was kind of this outsider in the ward, and with some of the kids who couldn't play on Sundays and all this stuff. I remember being kind of embarrassed by that and like not really thinking about this like, yeah, like, oh, what? No, we're not, because I'm not in church, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
at church, I'm not going to sacrament, I'm not going to primary, I'm not doing all this stuff. And but now, like, coming back to it, I think about that more so now, because I think some of those greatest times I think of me as a kid were spent at the cabin, right? I was with my dad. A lot of times I was with my aunts and my uncles, my cousins, my grandparents, and we were doing something for, like, the great, like, working towards something that everyone believed in. So now, like, looking back through an adult lens, I see how important just that was. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so, I mean, honestly, yeah, like, probably my best times, my most memorable times of my life were on the mountain. And then as I got older, kind of like preteen, teenager, um, you kind of have this ability, I think, to be a little more independent. I started going to church a lot, right? Like, just on my own. There was times I would just go by myself. Because, like I said, my parents weren't really into it, weren't married in the temple. And I started to go, and even into like 14, 15, 16, once I hit young women, I I had this, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go on a mission. I'm gonna go to BYU. Like, I finally, felt like, okay, I'm gonna make this like my life, my stuff, and I'm gonna go to church. And um like, I had some crazy callings too. Like, I remember
Yeah.
I was like Laurel president one time. I had like just some of that kind of stuff. And I always go to girls camp. I would go to all the activities. I'd help plan them all. I mean, I was like all in. And then when I was about, it was right before I turned 17, my parents got divorced. And um, I, having been kind of as involved in the church as I was, and really believed in everything, I It was right before my 17th birthday, so it was right before like my bishop interview or whatever they call it. And I remember going in there, and I remember telling my mom, like, no, we're just going to go to the church. The church is going to help us out. They're going to support us.
Oof.
And because I truly believed in all of it, and I got in there, and that's not what happened. Um, so, um,
What
so
happened? Will you share what
what
happened?
happened? Yeah, so I went in, small town. My bishop knew my parents, or knew my grandfather on my paternal grandfather. My paternal grandfather had actually just passed away like the summer before, or the 2 summers before. And he knew my dad really well, um, and knew my dad's brother, just this whole big thing, all this big connection. And I had a lot of respect. I do. I mean, I still, I say a lot about my paternal grandfather was someone who was super important to me, and I loved and I cared about. And yeah, I mean, he's been gone a long time, and I'm like getting emotional just talking about it. But anyway, my bishop told me that my grandfather would be super angry at me if he knew how I was treating my dad.
Oof.
And here I am, this like 17-year-old kid. I'm super confused about what's happening in my life. My family's splitting up, and I didn't get that support. And I remember walking, I think I left. Like, I don't remember anything else. I think I got up and walked out. And I remember just like this feeling, and I mean, like just sitting here talking about it, this feeling of like, I can't believe that this is happening, you
Yeah.
know. Like, here I am, I'm the one who's going to church. I'm the one who's doing all this stuff, and this is kind of what I'm getting from that. And that was like, I think that was very hurtful for me. And so, and kind of at the same time, I'd made some like different friends, probably not the best friends, but I'd made some different friends. Well, best friends, like good, appropriate friends, I think, in the eyes of like the church, but super great people, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't really go to church, and I kind of like opened my eyes up to like some of this, almost like this world outside. I mean, growing up in a small town, all this stuff kind of like this world outside of where we were at. And I found out these people were awesome, right? They supported me, they cared about
Mm,
me, they took care of me. When I didn't feel like I had, some of that at home or whatever, because I think, divorce is nasty and messy. And and so anyway, I had this cool support system that was not related to the church. And so I kind of just stopped going. Um, and then this kind of bleeds into like being a therapist. I'm sure I showed up pretty depressed and everything. My mom had me go to a therapist, and um
I didn't know this.
yeah, yeah,
This is something I didn't know about you.
I don't talk about this a lot. So yeah, I mean, I was struggling, and
Sure.
I go to a therapist. I am pretty sure it was like the LDS, like, I don't always bag on stuff, but it was an LDS Family Services, it was through the bishopric or something. And I went in super open, right? Like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. I'm drinking. I have a serious boyfriend. I really wasn't going to church at the time. I was probably almost 18 at this time. And the thing that was crazy though is like my grades are still good, everything's still good. Like, on the outside, I think I look great, but on the inside, I was a mess, and partying pretty hard, doing a lot of stuff. And he pretty much just like told me that I needed to, didn't listen to it. I didn't validate me at all, right? It was like, yeah, you need to stop doing this. You need to do this. You need to be this kind of person. Um, this is, and I was like, and I just remember leaving there thinking like, this is therapy. This sucks. And I,
Yeah.
instead of like, and at that time, I think I could have done like I'll never do therapy again. But instead, I kind of came out of it. Here I am at that time, a senior in high school. I'm getting ready to go to college. And I'm like, I think I want to be a therapist, because I never want a kid, never want anyone to feel like they don't matter. And because that is exactly how I felt when I left. I was like, you didn't even listen. You put me in this box. Of course, I'm using like my adult words right now, but like kind of, I felt like this therapist put me in this box and told me that this is what I had to do, and didn't listen to me because I'm like, I
Yeah.
was hurt, right?
Yeah,
And
I think it's so like there's just so many parts of this story where you like genuinely were reaching out for help and support, like starting from that like very first bishop meeting,
yeah,
you know, and it wasn't people, they just didn't have the capacity to give you what they need. I mean, partly because of their own stuff and just the way that I think the culture is in general, right? It was like, oh, how dare you be mistreating your father?
Right, right.
Even though, like, valid for you. I mean, come on, you're like a 17-year-old kid, your parents are going through a divorce, like that's so valid. And you had also put so much into the church, especially as you were sharing your adolescent experience. Like I think, that was like how you made up for kind of maybe feeling like the outcast as a kid. You're like, okay, I'm gonna be gung ho, I'm gonna be in. And you were so confident, you're like, Mom, we're gonna go get support. And then you didn't get it. And then she gets you support again with like a therapist and you didn't get it. And it's fascinating. And I think it's also speaks a lot to your character to then know like, oh, no one's gonna ever feel like, I'm not gonna let a kid feel like this.
Yeah, and so I ended up yeah, going to school, got my bachelor's, I ended up getting my master's, and I pretty much, adolescents are my thing, and then, yeah, working for the ranch, it's yeah, I mean, I love it. I love adolescents, I love young adults. I mean, I love everybody at this point, I've everything, families and everything, but I think, really when I look at it, my one of my passions is just working with teenagers, and it's been a cool journey too, as I have my own teenagers, um, too. So, but yeah, so that's what led me to be a therapist, and then, just even still, with the church stuff, I just stopped going. Like at that point, I just stopped going. Started dating my husband, um, and we actually, lived together for a year before we got married, and that was, great. And I think just because it was all my stuff, right? Like just all my fears. And lived together, ended up getting married, and and like that was the thing is temple marriage was like never on the table with him. Um, just with who we are, it just didn't feel right. Um, and then I feel like with like the Prop 8 stuff in California, or just the intolerance of just everybody, if you're different, same-sex marriage, all that stuff, that was really hard for me, just to sign on. And then when I think some abuse stuff started coming out about the church, just different things. So I officially took my name off their records. And you and I talked about this a lot because you,
Yeah, I remember when you did
yeah,
it because it was after I'd moved back to Utah. It's so funny about the Prop 8 thing. That's what I always say
yeah, that's
broke
what,
my shelf because I was in California at the time. I was a sophomore in college and I had a girl in my class and she had two dads. And I remember like she was so excited about the potential for them to be married. And then when it didn't happen, I received an email from the ward that I was in LA and they were like, oh, like come have a celebration. And I was like, wait, we're going to celebrate this girl's pain. And I never went back after that. So it's so funny that you shared that. But I remember because you sent me a documentary on like Amazon to watch. I can't even, I remember watching it. And then I went on this deep dive of all the abuse and I was sending it to you. And then I remember that's kind of when you got your records removed. But you hadn't been practicing or going for a long time
no, I
before
mean, I
that.
hadn't been for years. I mean, so it was probably 2018 when I finally was just, and yeah, with the abuse, with just a lot of the stuff, things that had come out, I think, and as I had my own kids, right?
Yeah.
Like I had my own kids. Um, One thing I will always stick to my guns about something I believe in, and I didn't feel right having my name on record, as record as someone who, was part of the church when I didn't believe in what it was anymore, and so I didn't want anything associated with that anymore. So um, yeah, I took my name off,
Yeah.
and it's interesting too. I remember having this conversation with you and really talking about it. And when I got the email, I can't forget it was an email or a letter or whatever that said, that I was officially out. And you made this comment. I mean, I can still remember this probably. Yeah, and he said something like, "Does it feel like a weight's been lifted off your shoulders?" And I was like, "Yes,
Yeah.
right." Like it was like this freedom. Anyway, super crazy. Um,
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I think it's kind of, I really relate to what you were talking about because when I had my records removed, same thing. I wasn't going, it had no like
yeah,
influence in my life, but just the fact that I was associated with an organization that was pretty oppressive to a lot of different ways of life aside from what the family proclamation says. I think even essentially as a therapist too, like it just didn't align with my integrity of what I believe in and like serving like the human condition. So it felt really necessary for me to like take that off.
Yep. Yeah, that's how I felt. So, and yeah, and I think it's evolved. Like I always think about just like my feelings around the church. I think there was a lot. I almost look at it like the stages of grief. I was really
Mm,
I think leaving as like an 18, 19-year-old, just kind of stopping, not going to church anymore. And it's pretty angry. And then, so I did like these deep dives into books. I read a ton of books and yeah, I watched a ton of documentaries um, and then it kind of just evolved to, I just like accept it now. I mean, and I think Cedar City in a lot of ways has changed. It's a lot better for my kids, raising my kids here, non-LDS. And I've noticed with each one of my kids, it's been a little bit different. My oldest was probably had the hardest time. I think not getting baptized, um, not really having that values. And so I don't know if it's just kind of like her age group or if it's just that, as more people, Cedar City has grown. I mean, it's grown a ton. And just people are just more open.
yeah. Yeah. No, I was gonna ask you. That was gonna be my question, how it's been raising your kids because they've never been raised in the church at
No,
all. And
they've
you
never.
still have family that are members?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, my husband's families, as far as I know, they're all still members. Um, and I mean, I always come back to my husband's sister is probably one of the kindest, nicest, and most amazing people that I know. Um, and never, felt judgment. If more people could be like her, I think that it would be amazing, and so I have a lot of respect, for her and for what she believes in. And that's something I always tell my kids, like, you know, there are some really good people and there are
Mhm.
some not good people, and you're gonna find that everywhere. And it has been hard, as my older daughter's gotten into high school and dating. I mean, she's had people tell her, I can't date you because you're not LDS. Um, you know, but yeah, and that's been kind of wonky. I feel like at times I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then I think just kind of, I think at the end of the day, I'm like, okay. And I mean, I have 3 girls and I raise them to be strong girls, strong women, um, because that's what they need to be. And they
Yeah.
are.
They are they're strong women and it's been really special for me because I have my kids are younger than your kids and it's been special for me to see how you raise them and to see what it's like for kids to not have the like programming that comes with kind of the patriarchal system that is in like a high control religion like the LDS church, right? And so just their like self-confidence in themselves because I think what's comes up for me a lot when I'm with your girls is I didn't feel like that as a kid. Like I didn't have that level of confidence and belief in myself and I know so much of it was kind of my own family system but also too this growing up in this culture that said this is how you're supposed to behave. This is how you're supposed to be, right? And it's been really special to watch your kids just be free to be who they are. And then I see that within my own kids too, because really, and it's so funny. I talk about this. I've been talking about this a lot with my husband, but like the LDS church has, I don't, the only time I talk about it is at work because
Right.
it's not a part of my life in any way, shape, or
Right.
form, right? Like you and I have talked about this. It's my whole life is outside of it and it's very meaningful and it's special and we have traditions and like all of the things in community and I see a huge difference in my kids and your kids than myself growing up in it.
No, I agree. I agree.
Like there's
Yeah.
just a freedom.
Yeah. And we don't have, um, I, yeah, I mean, I think it's a freedom. I think it's this idea of I just haven't made them do it. And I think starting to have kids, I mean, my husband and I talked a lot about it, and uh and there was kind of, some debates and some other stuff. because because we did have just because it's like that's kind of what you do. You bless your kids, you baptize your kids. This is what you do. And I always just came back to like I'm not gonna have my kids do something I don't believe in. Like that's not what I want to raise my kids. I want to raise my kids to be kind, empathic, compassionate people that have a good moral compass. That's all I want, and that they talk to us. And it did. I mean, yeah, my husband. It was a little bit long. I mean, there were some conflicts, but then he was fine. And he's still. I mean, his records. He doesn't care. I mean, he's super laid back. He's just like, I'm not going to church. Whatever. I'm not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like, I don't even think about it. Like, why do I care? Kind of thing. So and that's fine, right? We
Yeah,
don't.
no, I think I'm glad you brought that up too, because we for you and I, it was both important to have our records removed. But I actually don't think that's true for everyone. I don't think that's a part of deconstructing faith or a necessary thing. I think it's such a personal choice and really about tuning into what feels the most supportive to you and to your being. So I'm glad you shared that about your husband, that he doesn't have to have his records removed and he feels completely at peace with that, because that's how this all works, right? There's no one right way. And I think for a lot of us that were raised in a high control religion, there's so much of that we're battling against, this one right way to do things, to heal, to deconstruct, and actually there isn't. And it is complex and different for every person. And what is supportive, I think it's important to take, nuggets of like, oh, this is what was supportive for them, but that doesn't have to be your truth either.
I agree.
Yeah. And I wanted to circle back because one thing you said, maybe, and that kind of what helped you and just what's allowed you to grow and evolve, post being a member of the church. And you said that you made friends with people who weren't, and
Mhm.
they just like saw you for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was the first time in my life that I had kind of been out of this bubble almost in a way, right? Of it wasn't my family, it wasn't this neighborhood. Because, like I said, we grew up in this neighborhood that was super tight knit. And so all my friends from the time I was a kid to like middle school, it was all like kind of the same people. A lot of us were all the same age, and so um finding these friends, these other people, I think that just kind of accepted me, and that was just kind of cool. I think a cool experience for me to have because I don't know that I'd ever really felt that. And then as and then it's evolved, right? As you get older, I think you look at your own personal values, you look at what's important to you, you look at how people make you feel. I mean, that's one thing I always say to my kids, right? It's like when I leave an interaction with someone, I know if what I want, like if I want to spend more time with them, it's how I feel. And
Mm,
um I mean, I say that to my clients, say that to my kids, because if I don't feel good leaving an interaction, I don't want to hang out with them anymore, right? Because there's something about them that doesn't vibe with me, doesn't make me feel good. And so yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's evolved. I think it's and you and I have talked a lot about this too, just like you got to find your people, right? You got to
mm,
find and people I feel like you can um be kind of who you need to be, your true self in a lot of ways. Just show up authentic all the time, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah. And it takes time, and it takes like trial and error, and it takes a lot of like self ownership,
yeah,
you know? And we have talked a lot about this. What's coming up for me is I think about, I moved back to Utah in 2018, and it was really tough for me. It was really tough for me to come back to this culture and trying to, and almost like there was a level of regression to kind of falling back to some of those immature ways of building relationships. And it I think, what I started to realize is, well, I have some people who aren't like that, like in our friendship, and just really kind of leaning into that, to like the people. I love what you said about how do I feel when I'm with you, or when I'm with someone. I want it to feel like safe and comfortable, like easy, and I can show up a hot mess, or I can show up really excited, and just be received for that. And I think, really tuning into that, and especially the last few years, it's shifted a lot for me. And I think how I show up in my relationships and my friendships. And I even like I just like when I think about our relationship, it's just been this like constant evolution, right? We were always connecting, we were always talking and having these deep conversations. And then it's just like you've grown, I've grown, and it's like been kind of cool to grow together on this journey, you know?
I agree.
And I think that's what kind of led, like, how did we even decide to get a tattoo? We were just talking about we wanted to get a tattoo, right?
Yeah, so there's like this thing like you had just gotten, I think is it the dove on your hand?
Yeah, maybe it was like maybe it was my, I think it's supposed to be a hummingbird, but it's really small.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, it's okay. It's like it's my smallest tattoo. It's like the one tattoo I want to do differently. Anyways, doesn't matter.
So you had just gotten that one, and then yeah, I mean, I think we were just talking. We're like, yeah, we should get matching tattoos, right? Like,
And we booked the tattoo appointment without knowing what we were gonna get.
yeah, we're like, we've got her books are open, we got to do it now, right? I mean, how many of those conversations that we had? Our books are open, we got to book it now. Um, so yeah, we booked it, and then I remember we just were like going back and forth. What should we do? What should we do? What should we do? Um,
Yeah. Well, and that's and it's so funny too. And I should have pulled up the Charlotte Freeman quote. I didn't. It's in the first episode that inspired the tattoo. So you guys can go back and listen. But we kept sending it to each other. And I don't think like at first I don't think it wasn't, now it's intentional. Now we send to each other whenever we see it. But at first it wasn't, right? Like it would be like, it would just we just kept sending it back and forth.
would show up. It would just show up on my feed, on my Instagram feed, right? Or it would because I mean, someone would share, it and I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna send this dash, right? Oh, I'm gonna send that, and I mean, and I end up like buying her book and everything, right? Because it's just so cool, and um, yeah, I mean, I just think it was like it made sense, and I think that Emily, who did our tattoos, had done one, right? I
Yeah.
think a couple weeks before our appointment, we're like, yep, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, so we got matching sunflower tattoos in the exact same place. And then I mean, I shared in the first episode like how like sunflower, like it's been crazy what these sunflowers have done for me. Um, I don't know if you like what's been your experience with the sunflower.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I really liked how you did share like all that it is for you, and I would say yes, it's all those things, just like kind of the sun, like just finding that. But when I look at it, and I think it at times like this last year has been kind of a weird one in some ways. Between like work and like personal stuff, just whatever. But I think for me, my ability to look at it, like when I see it, I mean, it's in this like it's in a pretty noticeable spot, right on our arms, and when I see it, I always have this like feeling. I get this cool feeling like I always know I have someone in my corner, right? So I'm like, oh, if I see it and I'm like, oh, I'm struggling, I'm just gonna text Ashley, right? Or because it's like I
Mhm.
have this, it's like this connection that I feel like we have because I know it's someone who will hear me, right? Who will hold space for me and when I need it. And also, I mean, it's not like it's you're just like, oh, yeah, that sucks, but it's like you've also told me stuff, and I think that's also something I really think about when I think about being able to authentically show up for someone. I mean, there's times I've said stuff to you and you're like, okay, this is what you need to do. And there's not a lot of people in my life who can tell me what I need to do or like how I should approach things. There's only a few, right? A handful. And you're one of them that make me though like kind of think and reflect, okay, like that maybe I need to slow things down a little bit and like try to approach it from a different way because this way is not working. Um, but that's yeah, I think that for sure is yeah, on top of
Mm,
everything we talked about. And I think just this idea of like when I see it, I always know I have somebody, right?
mhm.
Like I have someone who I can like go to. So that's yeah, one of the ways it symbolizes for me.
Yeah, no, I love that. And just like what a tattoo can mean and what it can do for you in an instant, you know.
Right.
Not saying that everyone has to get tattoos, but it's the
Well, yeah, no, no.
if you want a tattoo, they're great. But and it's funny because I never got one until I was like, I think I was 30. Was after I was like 33 when I got my first tattoo, you know? Changed my life.
Yeah.
Sunflowers have changed my life.
And
I
I'm
love
like you, notice them all the time. I notice them like when I see them on things, I notice them.
yep.
And it always, but it does, it kind of like brings up this, and maybe that's what's crazy about it. It almost brings like this sense of like safety or, just this ability just to be okay, right?
Yeah. I love what you said too when you're talking about like an authentic relationship. And that doesn't always mean like saying everything that the other person wants to hear. And I would agree with you. That is what is so much at the heart of our relationship. I can think of a handful of things right off the top of my head when you're like, Ash, I don't think that like that person's allowed to feel that way. And I was like, well, you're right. You're right, and there is, to me, there is a lot of safety in that because I trust that you are going to tell me the truth, that
Right.
you respect me enough as a human to tell me the truth, even if that truth is hard to hear, right? Because you're also going to be there for me in the hardness of the truth. And I don't know, that is something that I genuinely value in my relationships. And it's hard to come by because it requires a lot of trust within ourselves and in our relationships to say it. But I think it is so important to this authentic piece and just having deep, meaningful relationships.
And and vulnerability, right? It's like so vulnerable, I think, as the person who's maybe telling the truth. Like it's scary, and you've got to have a lot of trust and I think connection and know that it's going to be okay if I tell you these things,
Hmm.
right? And I think it's hard to have that with a lot of people because I think a lot of people are not. And then sometimes I'm not either, right? Like self-aware enough to say, oh yeah, like I need to slow down and think about that for a minute
Yeah.
before I just am quick to dismiss it and move on. Like,
Yeah.
you know.
No, for sure. I love that. I love this conversation that we're having. I want to talk about a little bit more like what you do. I mean, you are a therapist, you work with a lot of people, you offer so much healing and you're really so incredible at what you do.
Oh, thanks.
So I mean, when I like think about just like what you talked about how you love working with adolescents and it's I've had the opportunity to witness you just at working at the ranch and it's powerful. And I think you are, and to learn from you, because I know I've talked to you about cases and just to hear how you would approach things, you are so fantastic as a therapist. And I am lucky to be able to consult with you and talk with you. I think, that's one thing being a therapist we don't always have. And then I not only have this therapist who's my really good friend, who's a badass therapist herself, but I also has left the Mormon church. Like it's like so cool to have, just the dynamics of our relationship. And so, yeah, I want you to share more about what you do. I want you to talk about equine therapy and this new venture you're doing, because I think it's a huge asset to Southern Utah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Adolescents are my passion. A lot of times people don't love them. I guess I need to go back. I want to thank you for all your kind words. You know, validation. Well, I'm working on that. I always don't do it. So thank you. Um, Yeah, I mean, I could say the same about you. I mean, it's been this cool thing. Coming back kind of to the friendship before I jump into the therapy piece, is it has been interesting, I think, to have someone who I feel so close to, who's also a therapist. Because sometimes I think people feel this weird judgy thing, like, oh, you're gonna psychoanalyze me. And I've never felt that way, and which I think is also a way when we live like authentically and we live like who we are, like I don't always have my therapist hat on. I don't always, I'm not always perfect and, I can flip my lid a little bit and I can do these other things that are definitely not therapeutic, but I think
Well,
is
because you're
I think
human. You're
I'm
human.
human. I'm human and because, but I think also really try to have enough self-awareness around things like when I do that, how do I repair things? How do I go back? So anyway, um, but no, yeah. Yeah, so I love working with adolescents. I don't know what it is. Sometimes I think it's such a hard time of your life. Like I think back to my own adolescence and now it's rough, right? It's hard. And then there's been some cool things I think just with like brain development. I think back when I first learned first started out as a therapist, just how much um the field has changed and we've learned so much more about brain and and trauma and just so much stuff. So anyway, if I even go back further, um, again, been around horses, been around livestock my whole entire life. I went to work when I went to work at the ranch. I went to work there because of the equine director who has been kind of like my friend. I've known her my whole entire life. And just another cool example of just like attunement to someone and feeling like you can be genuine with someone. And we've together probably have done, we were trying to count it up, like 500 groups, right? Working at DRS, 500 groups and individual sessions and family sessions and all this
And
stuff.
this is with equine therapy, correct?
Equine therapy.
Yeah.
And so about a year ago, year and a half ago, she kind of threw out there, she's like, she had done some equine therapy stuff with another therapist in town who actually she moved to a different state. And she's like, you want to do this? Like, I really kind of miss it. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. She's like, I think we should just like start a business. And I was like, I don't know. Um, that sounds like a lot, right? We're not business people. That's one thing we always come back to. We're not business people. We've had to learn a lot. We've had some great teachers helping us too, like learn how to do this. But um, like, yeah, we want to do equine therapy. We follow this approach called natural lifemanship, which I think speaks to so much of what we see, what we do. I think growing up with horses and then working with horses in kind of like this therapeutic setting, I've learned so much about what they are. Like horses are this amazing, just intuitive, intelligent, emotionally intelligent like being. And I've seen some incredible things happen working with horses. Um and people and kids and people, I mean, it's easy to, I think we have this genuine love for animals a lot, most of us do. And I think it's really easy to let your guard down and be present with this horse and build this connection. So natural lifemanship is just a lot of, it's a trauma informed practice that really deals with attachment and connections and brain rewiring and this whole other thing. And it's something like that we truly believe in, and I will stand behind it. I mean, it's just cool. I mean, it's just amazing, right? And so we worked on our stuff. We we have been um we started this business thing. We did all the things right. Wanted to make sure we were all legit. And we started taking clients about a month and a half, 2 months ago. Just kind of starting out small, seeing where it goes. And it's been awesome, right? And I think there was that fear, again, when you start a business with someone who um is one of your good friends, and that you kind of get scared.
Yeah, it's scary.
But it's also been this place where, again, like, how I feel about her, and being able to be authentic and being like, no, this is like what's going on for me right now, and having her being able to say the same, like, it's been really cool, right? Like, so we have this cool openness, and I think due to our openness and like just our relationship and our attunement, I think is why this works and why it's going to work. And it's super cool. I mean, I've been very grateful, I think, for our community support, for our friends support, for our family support. Um, and it's going to be a cool thing, right? And it's kind of busy right now. We're trying to juggle everything, but yeah, Silver Lining Equine. It's my new venture. It's awesome. It's going to be a cool journey.
And you are offering equine therapy sessions for individuals, like of all ages,
Yep. Individual.
families.
We'll do families. We are starting to talk, like team building stuff. We've done a lot of team building stuff. Um, so we talked about, yeah, team building, hoping to kind of get into some like intensive work. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was wondering too if like maybe I think it might be helpful for people to hear like what would a individual session look like, an equine therapy session look like. I
Yeah.
mean, I know it's kind of hard, but like walk us through what that might look like a little bit.
Yeah. So first session, so we have eight horses that we all know that we love and trust, right? They love what they do. They love being kind of this partner in this. And so first session is actually like meet your horse, right?
Mm.
So we're gonna walk around and you're going to meet a horse. Like, we're gonna walk in and out of the pastures, we're gonna have you talk to them. And so sometimes, and then it's all therapy, right? So why did you choose this horse? Well, some people will say, I chose this horse because he's beautiful, he's pretty. That's like a pretty big therapeutic thing, right? To talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We've had people say, I chose this horse because I felt like he respected me,
Mm. Mm.
right? Or
Deep.
I felt, or I'm gonna pick this horse because I can tell that he's gonna push my boundaries, and that's something I need to think about. So we always kind of come into like trying to be intentional when you choose a horse and kind of not being intentional. Like, I don't want to ever direct a person, like use kind of our, like our objectives. I always want to keep those out of there. But sometimes it's like, what do you hope to learn? Right. And so it takes some time. I mean, there's people who take like a whole session to learn their horse, to figure out who they want to work with, to meet their horse. And then that horse is like primarily their horse, like that they are going to work with. And then we do there's just a lot of connection pieces. So it's, sometimes it seems um crazy, but we do talk a lot about connection and attunement. And so then we might bring the horse. So then sessions after that, we're going to talk about haltering. We're going to talk about, is a horse allowing you to do that? We're going to talk about regulation. Horses' heartbeats beat really slowly. We talk a lot about co-regulation. So we teach a lot of like regulation skills. We talk about, like with some of our younger clients, we've been doing kind of like colors, like where you feel it in your body, whereas a
Mhm.
horse, where the horse feels this in your body. Um, we've done some kind of cool stuff with families where we've painted out their story on the horse
Yeah.
with this connection. And yeah, we just do a lot of different stuff about connection, rhythm, regulation is where we talk about, and it's just, and then organically a lot of the stuff just comes out, right? Like, or if the horse is dysregulated, we're like, how are you feeling? Like what's coming up for you? What's going on for you? And really kind of getting that like mind, in some ways it's this mind body connection because horses feel a lot of stuff. I read somewhere like horses can hear heartbeats, 14 feet away, um, stuff like that. So it's really, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I can geek out on horse stuff all day,
Yeah.
but I've totally seen like some crazy things play out like in family sessions just with patterns with families. Um, the kid doesn't it just doesn't feel like they're a part of the family, so the parents just kind of take over, and that's therapy. That's therapy. Let's talk about how you roll, how these are playing out. Talk
Yeah.
about how you're working well together, right? Too, like what's going well in here. Um, and I've just seen, I've just seen kids come in, and I've had parents say they're talking more to you guys right now than they have the whole time they've been in a therapist office, right? We might be able to find out more about a kid in like 2 sessions than, and not saying, I mean, we all know I do in-person therapy, definitely in an office, but just it's a different thing, and it's cool. And my partner is just really awesome about, we just really are able to kind of just go back and forth with each other. And
Hmm.
even if it's not a therapist, she might as well be. And um just super attuned to things that are going on and attuned to the horses, and just everything that happens is therapy all the whole time.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you for sharing all that. And I guess like my last question there is how have you seen like in your work, like the natural lifemanship, the equine therapy, what has been like some of the more healing aspects of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think about the healing aspects. I think about, if I go back to the ranch where I've seen it kind of play out for like years, I think about this idea of like confidence. I've always seen like confidence, right? And I've seen a lot of kids who have struggled with connection, and they have this awesome connection with their horses. And then we can take that and like, how do you make connections with your peers? How do you make connections with your parents?
Hmm.
Right? Like, you're able to come in here soft, and like you're able to talk to this horse, and you're able to relate to this horse. Like, what happens when you leave here and you go back to your peers and you're not acting like that? What do you see? Right. So bring a lot of that back. And do that with like Silver Lining too, with some of our younger clients we're working with, like, okay, like here you are, you're coming in soft, you're talking to the horse, you're talking, you're sharing all this stuff, you're able to regulate. How can you do that at home? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
your
that's
mom
powerful.
can do that. Let's teach you some skills, right? Teach you some ideas. Uh,
Yeah. What's coming up for me too is like in working with like the horses in these sessions is like there's just so much authenticity there.
mhm.
Like, right? Regardless of how you show up. So if you show up super dysregulated to a session, like you're gonna have to work through that with the horse. But you,
Don't lie, right? Like
yeah,
that's what we always tell
yeah,
people, like they do not lie. They're gonna tell you how they feel.
yeah, which is
Like,
so powerful. It's like it's even circling back to what we were talking about those relationships, right? That can say what we don't always want to hear, which I would imagine you at times your clients don't want to hear what the horses have to say. They're not ready for it, but there's also medicine in that, right?
Well, and I think too, like, if the horses comes in and they're agitated, and then your client gets even more agitated and upset, and it's like, and then I think a lot of stuff comes up like control. Like, how are you trying to control your relationships? Yeah, you can't control what this horse is doing, but how can you co-regulate? How can you work together? Right?
Yeah.
Or do you want to sit here and be mad because your horse is not doing what you want them to do?
Yeah.
And then that's a whole other issue, right, in your relationships. So it can be, yeah, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, no, and Silver Lining Equine is taking new clients, correct? You guys are
Yes.
open for business.
Yeah, we're open. We're rolling.
Okay, I will, and all of that will be in the show notes. So you guys are local to Southern Utah. Great resource.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing all that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I've done a handful of equine sessions, group sessions at the ranch with your partner Lee, and I mean, some of the most powerful therapy I've ever witnessed in my life.
It's crazy. It's
It is powerful, and I think too for a lot of people that have gotten burnt out from traditional talk therapy, right? Or they've tried a bunch of different approaches. It is a completely different modality working with your own nervous system, but also the nervous system of the
Yep.
horse, essentially, right? And so I think that just and then there's that relational connection part of it that just gets so deep in your being that we can't really get to in just a talk therapy session. So I love that it's like almost like another approach to therapy that's highly effective that doesn't require you going to sit on a couch or a chair, right? We're both talk therapists, but like doesn't require that in order to kind of make progress and heal and work through the things that are creating difficulty for you.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's so much I think you can just learn about yourself with the horses.
Yeah. I need to come do some equine sessions.
Yeah, come anytime.
Okay, so one part of this podcast is that I get submissions from the audience and they send us questions and I like to questions, share stories, right? Then I like to kind of give the opportunity to talk about them and share one this person's question experience and also for us to maybe dive into it. And it's kind of cool because we're both therapists and you can bring your therapist hat in, you can bring your human hat in, so it doesn't matter. But it's kind of my fun thing about this podcast. So I have a few questions. We'll see how many we get to, and we're just gonna jump in. I'll read the first one.
Okay.
All right. This might be a weird topic, laugh out loud. I left the Mormon church 3 years ago, and I'm always on edge regarding how I handle a death now, like in terms of funerals and coping mechanisms, too. I don't feel connected to any religion, and I'm curious how non religious people arrange funerals. Hopefully, this isn't too morbid. And I picked this question specifically for you,
I
and
know, I know.
and you can share why. So I'll let you share why.
Yeah, so I don't know. I have had this morbidly, I don't even know what you'd call it. It's not like I've just always been fascinated with like cemeteries and just different things. So, and funerals, there's just this weird thing. In fact, everywhere I travel, right, I always go to a cemetery.
Hmm.
Uh, it's something, and then, like I said, maybe it's this morbid fascination. I don't know what it is. Maybe I should dive into that. Maybe it's some other childhood thing. I don't know, but I always had this kind of more this fascination with them, and so I know this is why you picked this. Um,
Yes, Rochelle loves cemeteries and she visits cemeteries a lot. So I thought this would be the
yeah,
perfect question for her to dive into.
yeah. So and I've thought about it a lot. Because there's this thing, and I think about being from Cedar City, growing up in an LDS culture, growing up and being I've probably been to hundreds of funerals, right? Like even if it's not a close family member or a close friend, it's a friend of a friend or a family member or whatever. So I've just been to a ton of funerals. And so again, like growing up, that's the only kind of funerals I ever went to, right? And there is something about these rituals, the viewings, the family prayers where they close the casket, the funeral service itself, and they do the consecrations of the grave. There's all these rituals, and it's very interesting to me in a lot of ways. And but then as I got older and I'm going to like different funerals on different things, Like, wow, people do things a lot differently than they do here. Or I'm telling people, like my friends from who don't live here, I'm like, oh, you guys, like, oh, you don't have this? They're like, no. I'm like, oh, that's crazy. Like, that's just how I've grown up. So, and there are times, I think, especially after leaving the church, I've thought about what if I died tomorrow? Like, I don't want to have a church in a stake center or a funeral in a stake center. I don't want to do that. And what do I want? Right. And so um the one thing I think that's really hard for me for LDS funerals is they really just feel like they are so sad. Like
Hmm.
it's so sad. And it is sad. Like, don't get me wrong, like I'm not saying you shouldn't be sad at a funeral. Um, but I also think there's not this part of this person's life that's celebrated. Like, where's the
Yeah.
celebration for this like life that someone's lived? And there doesn't always seem to be a lot about that. And it seems like for me that that's what's really hard um is there's just not a lot of celebration. And so I really like the ideas of like celebration of life and like people going and just getting together and talking about great times instead of having, I think, just a lot of prayers around it. And that's one thing that kind of, sometimes I think you go to more like LDS funerals and they're kind of like just want to tell you how great of a LDS person they were. And I don't always feel
Yeah.
like part either, right? That's not always who they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
oh, sorry. What
oh, go-
comes up for me though, exactly what you're saying is like it is very melancholy. And I also sitting here thinking like that's also how church feels. It's
yeah,
not like there's no celebration and like even when you're singing, it's very melancholy. And I think when I think about right, like a celebration of life, or even if I'm gonna go, there's a lot of churches out there that it is very much like
yeah,
stand up and dance and celebrate and like let's be excited about this. And that's not how it is in the LDS church, and that is not how LDS funerals are. And I would agree with you. And I think there's also this focus of, like God has you, God's gonna be there for you. And I think there is a huge part of that in the grief process that can be super supportive, but
yeah.
sometimes not.
And I think, that's part of the grief process, like the grieving process. And like, I think other people's just how they grieve, right? Everyone grieves differently and everyone's way they grieve hopefully is not maladaptive, right? Hopefully it's really that they work towards, the acceptance of it. But yeah, I mean, I've sat in funerals where I've been pissed and mad and having to hear that this was God's plan, this was God's way. And I'm like, well, this really sucks,
Hmm.
right? I actually don't agree with this because this is horrible. And and that has just more like kind of made me mad. But I do, yeah. I mean, I like the idea of a celebration of life. I like the idea of like just doing something to really show what this person's, life has been like. Maybe that's, I think sometimes that's my fascination with with cemeteries is that I think all these people have passed on, like what have they left behind? And so that's my own stuff about legacies and things like that. But I think one thing that's hard about when you leave the LDS church, and I get what this person's saying, is like they don't really feel connected to any religion,
Hmm.
right? And so I think for me, like not really feeling connected to the LDS church, and if someone passes away here in Cedar City and that I'm close to and they're, in their religion, I go for respect for them and their family, and that's how I always come back to it. If it's someone especially that I was close to, um, I feel like I've been able to take away a lot of the anger I have towards, the LDS church and a lot of the other stuff I have, but coming back to like, I, um, I will be there. I will support this. I will do it because of the love, maybe, and
Yeah.
the respect I have for this person. And so I can kind of put that stuff to the side. I don't pray, and that's kind of just my own thing, right? Is like I just don't believe in that kind of prayer, and that feels to me fairly rehearsed, like this doesn't, and I don't like it, but that's okay. But I do feel like I am there with a good, I'm coming in there as myself and like the love I have for this person or the respect I have for their family. And I think too, like growing up LDS, like you get to this place where you're like, what you feel like, you're going to go to the celestial kingdom if you do all the things you're supposed to do. And so I think when you don't believe in that anymore, you've really got to think about what do I believe in? Like what
Yeah.
is out there after this? Because I don't know, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. And I honestly don't know anyone who knows. There's a lot of people to claim to know, but no one really knows.
So I think that's also hard when you kind of take, like this person talks about not feeling connected to any religion. And yeah, so I mean, I just make it about the person, right? I just make it about my relationship with the person, and I'm grieving that. I'm
Yeah,
grieving.
I really I like that too of like setting the intention when you're going to a funeral to go to to celebrate because you can set that intention on your
Yeah.
own to go celebrate this person's life and to show up for them and what I'm hearing also too is like the connection to whatever is the afterlife is actually more about like your connection to the person and how and your relationship with them and how that kind of feels and I do think that this is a very tough topic post leaving the
Oh,
LDS
I
church.
agree. I think it's
I personally have attended a few funerals since leaving the LDS church, and every single one I've gone to has been very activating to me. And I think there's layers to that. I think it's activating because maybe of my own religious trauma upbringing. I think it's activating as a therapist and the way that death is talked about. And I think also too the lack of celebration because the prayers are very rehearsed. I would much rather have a bunch of people get up and talk about all the different parts of this person's life that don't have anything to do with how they existed in a religion, right? And so I do want to say that I think post high control religion, and especially because LDS funerals are very unique, they are activating for sure.
well, and I think too, because you're in a stake center, right? You're in the chapel, you're
Yep.
in, and I mean, I get in there and I start thinking like sometimes, and again, I guess it comes back to like just my intention, why am I here? Right? I'm here
Yeah.
because I'm celebrating this person. Yeah, my love and my respect. It's the way I grieve it, right? And like if that's the only way I'm gonna have maybe that opportunity to grieve that relationship, that's the way I have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, part of this question is how non-religious people arrange funerals. I don't have a ton of experience with this, but one of my very best friends, her dad passed away a few years ago, and we had a celebration of life for him at a country club. And it was
Yeah.
awesome. Like there was food and beverages and his picture was there and people got up and talked about like their experience with him and it was just a celebration of life and it wasn't there wasn't like this whole melancholy experience or rituals and it was just as beautiful and meaningful as any other funeral that I have attended. So I think also too I would just invite this person to be open and curious about maybe what is coming up for you, what are the activations that you're feeling when you are attending LDS funerals and to I would even invite you to be curious about where you at with your own thoughts about what happens after death because I think when you grow up in a culture that says this is what's going to happen when you die. There is an element of hope or safety in that, even though no one really knows. So then that's stripped of you and people die and it's like, now what? And I would say for me personally, and I learned this from the same best friend who lost her mom when she was 15. She was the first person I was ever around that like talked about death as if it was a normal thing. Because guess what it is? It's normal. It's probably the most universal thing that makes us humans. And it was about so her mom, she called her mom Jillbug, and there was anytime we saw a ladybug, like and I remember I was like 18 years old, she was my college roommate, and I had never been around anyone who had talked about death like this. And every time we'd see a ladybug, she'd be like, oh, Jillbug's here. She's here with us. She's she's just checking on me. And it was so beautiful because it didn't matter what she believed in the afterlife, she could have her mom here with her right now. And to this day, every time I see a ladybug, I'll send her a picture or I'll text her and be like, hey, Jill Bug is with me today. And I think when I work with a lot of people in grief, I'm encouraging them to be curious about what that would look like, right? It doesn't have to be a ladybug, but what are the things that keep us connected to the people who have passed on and you don't get a lot of that when you grow up in a church that says this is what's going to happen when you die, you know.
You're right. The curiosity is not always there because yeah, this is what's gonna happen.
Yeah. All right. Okay, that was a fun question. Thanks for your shares. All right, let's do one more.
Okay.
Are you good with that one more?
Yeah, let's do it.
Because of where I'm at with the church, partial attendance, not totally committed, but like the idea of having faith, I'm terrified to have another child because I don't know if we have a baby blessing question mark, but my family would be appalled if we didn't. Same with baptism. Right now, I'm glad my daughter isn't of age yet, but in less than 2 years, I don't know where I'll be, but I don't think I can have her baptized. And again, I don't know how I'll tell family with this when the time comes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is probably I think that to me this is one of the hardest things.
same.
Right. I mean, I just think it has to, it's hard. And I think especially, kind of, just still kind of in, still kind of out. Um, the first thing that always comes to mind with this though is that I think that you and your partner always have to be on the same page, right?
Hmm.
First and foremost, even before you think about what your own family's response is going to be, I think you have to think about what you and your partner want and where you're both at. Um, yeah, I mean, I think about, like, because it's true, right? I think about this came up a lot, I think, when your kids are young and their cousins are getting baptized and their friends are getting baptized. And, um, and I think, if this person who asked the question, their kids are probably currently going to church a little bit, right? And so there probably is that idea of like, hey, I've got to be 8, I got to be baptized. Um, and so I think you have to, yeah, really think about what that's going to look like and what you want for your kids. Um,
Yeah.
I with parent like when you have to tell your family, I mean, it's so hard. And I think one thing I try to recognize is that trying to look at it too from like the family's point of view. I think they don't really want that judgment on them, right? Like if you make that choice, I think to not baptize your kid, I think sometimes your parents are like, well, people think that we didn't teach you right, or we didn't do the right thing, we didn't do the correct thing. I feel like some people are really worried about how the judgment is going to come back on them. And I think that's hard. Um, Again, I mean, I didn't baptize my kids because I wasn't going to do something I didn't 100% believe in and force that
Yeah.
out.
I mean, it's interesting too because the baby blessing. And it's so funny. I'm actually remembering I got an email from someone like, "What's the matter with the baby blessing?" And I don't know if there is anything a matter with a
Yeah.
baby blessing, right? But I also know that our nervous system, right, starts receiving things when we're in utero before we ever have any cognitive memories. And I know this, you know this, right? You're also a therapist. And when you're born into a religion and you're the baby blessing really, I mean, I know like haven't been to a baby blessing in a very long time, but like, right, you're receiving those messages. Your little being is receiving those messages. And it's interesting. I think this kind of like brings up some personal stuff for me because I was not blessed by my dad because he was
Yeah.
not a member of the church and you
Yeah.
weren't either.
My dad did not hold the highest priesthood to bless me.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like we don't have cognitive memories of that, right? But our own dad wasn't allowed to do this to us in this church that says that he should do that. That's what makes him the best dad, you know? So it's interesting to me because I think these messages really get into our being when we're how old were like you're 3 months old. I don't know how old they baby bless, but you're tiny. And so I don't know. That's what always comes up for me with the baby blessing. And again, I think it's all kind of how you conceptualize prayer and energy too, right? It's to give a kid a blessing and wish them a good life. I think that's a really beautiful experience. But what are the messages of the blessing? And I would just invite the person, I don't know what those messages are. I would invite the person to be curious about that and to tune into what that maybe means with them in terms of their alignment as the parent. I think it is so contingent on your relationship with your partner. And I also want to say if you do make the choice to not bless your kids or not baptize your kids, yeah, your parents probably are not going to be okay with that. And they're going to have a reaction and they're going to have their own judgments. And also that's not your responsibility.
Right.
It's not. And I get that there's so much activation with that. But you are not responsible for how your parents respond. You're responsible for yourself and the way you want to raise your kids and what's going to create more regulation for you long term. Like you said, I didn't choose to bless or baptize my kids because it's not something I believe in. So imagine what comes up for me is you say you did bless or baptize your kids and something you don't believe in. How do you then navigate that as a parent?
Right. Well, and I think what kind of messages am I sending behind that, right? I'm like totally doing some other stuff. And I think too there would have been a lot of resentments, right? About, yep, had to baptize my kid, had to do this. I hate being told what to do. And so there is kind of that. And and I left it with my kids. I don't know how and this is something maybe I might have to, who knows, I might have to face this one day, right? I've told all my kids, when you're 18, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can make those decisions. I mean, just like getting a tattoo. You can get a tattoo at 18, but you're not getting a tattoo before that, like, right? Like, I'm not signing off on that. But I think, it's man, I just think it's hard. And I think it is. I think it's scary
Hmm.
because you don't know. Well, you kind of know, right? Your family will be upset. Your family will be mad. No one likes to make their family mad. No one likes to make their family upset. And that's scary.
It's so scary. And as I say, you're not responsible for their emotions. I know how hard that is, right? That is so incredibly difficult to navigate. And it is so uncomfortable that a lot of people just make the choice to do what they don't want to do so they don't have to deal with the discomfort of that. And I like to think about it in this way. It is really, really uncomfortable to make them upset. But let's look at the long-term discomfort, right? What's going to be more uncomfortable for you long term? That conversation will suck. It will be awful, right? But choosing to do something that you don't actually want to do, you're going to have to live with. And I would invite this person to be really curious about what are the consequences on both sides and what's that going to do with your relationship with yourself, with your partner, with your kids, with your family, right? We're talking about choosing to baptize them for them. You're harboring some resentment. I do think that could create more damage long term in the relationship with your parents versus this really hard thing, too. So, again, I don't think there's a right answer and I don't think there's an easy answer. Um, but I don't know.
And I always think too, and maybe it's just, I mean, I just read this person's question. I mean, like the terrified and the appalled. Like, I'm like, oh God, I feel that for you. I feel that for this person who asked
Yeah.
this question. Because it is terrifying. And then I would say too, you have a couple years. I know you're terrified to have another kid, but you have it sounds like you have a little bit of time to maybe really sort out where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
Church and maybe kind of come to a place of acceptance with that. Like, you know, you like the idea of having a faith, maybe you explore other faiths. I think there's a lot of people who are like that too. Like, LDS church didn't work for me, but I really like this. But I think because I think some people do need that or want that in their life. Um, but yeah, I think get on the same page with your partner and I think have some really good conversations about what that's going to look like with
Yeah.
your.
Yeah, and I think just being curious and open and not having to you don't have to make a decision right now, right? Even if you become pregnant, you don't have to make a decision. Just giving yourself time and space and no matter what you choose, like you'll just kind of trusting your ability to there's going to be hard no matter what you choose.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's hard and I think we get scared if it's our kids too. I mean, I think when it's just us, it's like one thing but when you're bringing your kids into it, it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for the submissions. Rashell, thank you so much for coming on this podcast and chatting with me about all the things. I mean, there's so much good stuff we covered today. I don't know if there's any final words or final thoughts you want to end with.
No, I mean, I think I just really appreciate this opportunity. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for you. I'll tell you that every day, right? Grateful for you in my life and grateful for all that you're doing. And I'm excited for this too.
I'm grateful for you, and Sunflower Movement has just definitely been made possible because of you, and I really, really appreciate that. And I'm definitely gonna have you and Lee come back on and talk more about Silver Lining Equine once I'm a little more set up with in person. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If today's content resonated with you, please share, leave a review, all the things. It would mean so much to me. If you are interested in being a guest on Sunflower Movement, there will be a link in the show notes to submit an application. If your submissions align with the vision of Sunflower Movement, I will connect to set up a time for you to be a guest on the podcast. Disclaimer, coming on this podcast as a guest will be for entertainment and education purposes only. It will not be a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Thank you so much again for tuning in and being a part of the Sunflower Movement community.